Alright people, it's time to get into another Warhammer 40k video. Today we have Space Marines 2, the Titus lore. If you guys missed it, I watched the secret level Warhammer episode. I watched it when it first came out and people were in the comments asking questions if I already seen it. Yeah, I seen it and I just never uploaded it on YouTube. It was already just sitting up on there on Patreon. So yeah, but Titus was in that one and people were telling me that I should probably check out the Titus lore video, and I think that would be a dope idea, you know? Because he is the chosen one, the Lisa Nagaib, you know what I'm saying? I was filling me in on a lot of lore stuff on reasons why, you know, the chaos didn't work on him and he's just not affected by fear and stuff like that. So maybe this will give me a little bit of insight. It's an hour-long video. Hopefully you guys enjoy. Smash the like button, subscribe to the channel. The original video is at the top of the description. I already left a like. Hopefully you guys do the same. I know this journey is going to be amazing. Without further ado, man, let's get into you. Isn't a good patient? I'm amazing. Also, this is a new Warhammer channel. I mean, I haven't seen. This is for Space Marines.
Wear the mantle of hero. Inspire where you can. But remember always that we are the angels of death, not of mercy or salvation.
Tough. Actually tough. What the hell? Angels of death. Oh, he got 4 of them hoes. Okay, y'all corrected me also in one of the Warhammer videos. I think it was a secret level. That these are like 50 years a piece. 50 years of service or something like that. Or, yeah. I thought it was 100.
What does it mean to be a Space Marine? A member of the Adeptus Astartes. To exist as such an individual is to number yourself among the most elite warriors humanity can bring to bear in the dark era of the 41st millennium, where human existence stands, as it has for thousands of years, on the precipice of total annihilation from both invasive, innumerable enemies and the corrupting forces that emerge from within human civilization itself. The Imperium of Mankind is the galactic-spanning civilization of humanity in M41. With such a vast empire, mankind can bring considerable forces to bear in the defense of its imposing territory. The bulk
Segmentum Solar. Bro, holy shit.
of this forms the hundreds of billions of regular humans who join the renowned military force known as the Imperial Guard, the Astra Militarum. There are other factions as well, the zealous members of the Adeptus Sororitas, for example, smaller in number but carrying with them the ever-burning wrath of the Emperor of Man. There are also those known as Mechanicus, the tech priests of Mars, who can deploy their own armies alongside the immense ancient war machines known as Titans. The Imperium itself contains many more specific forces and sub-factions that it can bring to the battlefields of the distant future, but none can even begin to approach the legendary reputation of those warriors known.
I thought this is the Emperor art. This Emperor art, surely, right? Or is this? I remember Horus having claws like that too, right? But he's gold, so I don't know. Damn, that looks tough though.
As the Astartes. They were created in the earliest days of the emergent Imperium as the Emperor of Mankind unified the tattered remnants of what had once been humanity during its zenith period of the Golden Age, known in the contemporary era as the Dark Age of Technology. By the time the Emperor was a known figure, those days of glorious unity had disintegrated into a total collapse of human civilization. This was brought about largely due to galactic war and subsequent isolation. The Emperor of Mankind emerged in this time to reunite and lead humanity as the most powerful being ever to call themselves
I know this part of the story.
A figure of godlike ability, able to draw strength and power from the warp, also known as the Immaterium. This is a parallel realm to our material reality, and whilst the Emperor does draw power from the warp, his interaction with it is on an entirely different scale than that of the ordinary psychic users, for he harnesses the warp's energy with a level of mastery which borders on the divine, and without any risk of corruption. This power imbues him with a psychic strength of near unseen capability.
I'm always like curious what the specifics are. Like what specifically can he do, since he like that guy, and you know, with his control of the warp, you know, psychic abilities from the warp, like examples and stuff.
His exact origins, life journey, and overall intentions, though, remain something of endless speculation and remain shrouded in the mists of time. This is something that I have speculated and discussed upon greatly in other videos, but most see him as a benevolent figure who saved humanity from complete annihilation, and in the successful wake of the reunification, launched his great crusade to reunite all humanity throughout the galaxy and form the Imperium of Man, the tool he would deploy to enable this grandiose vision, the Space Marines. To be an Astartes, though, is to live a life wholly disconnected from the rest of humanity. For while they may
you guys also told me that Space Marines actually don't need to take their armor off. They can actually just live forever in the armor. Like, everything is handled within the armor. Pissing and shitting, everything is just handled in the armor. You just don't have to...
still qualify as human. Nasty, they are in the most significant ways distinctly separated from what we would consider as such. Space Marines undergo a grueling transformation process after selection to become Space Marine aspirants at an early age. Many will not survive the physically extreme overhaul, which will see them transition from base humans to genetically engineered warriors, stronger, faster, the elite of the elite. Their chapters, such as the Ultramarines, Blood Angels, Black Templars, and Imperial Fists, only contain 1,000 battle brothers at any given time. When they are called upon to deploy to a conflict zone, it is often in small numbers to bolster or support a far larger existing...
Yeah. We've seen in the secret level, when there was only just like 3 of them literally just smoking shit.
...planetary force, or to supplement a task force within a specific system. Space Marines only appear in large army-scale forces whilst on a crusade, such as the ongoing Indomitus crusade, launched in the contemporary period of the Imperium. But there are of course always exceptions and times where a critical mass of Space Marines from a single chapter may be deployed.
And that has to be terrifying to look at.
But by and large, smaller deployments are typical for the Astartes, such as we saw with Titus and how he was deployed to Graia during the invasion of the Orcs and the later Chaos incursions. The Astartes numbered but a few, but were still able to turn the tide of that conflict. This is because Space Marines are able to operate in small numbers by their physical adaptations and the supporting hardware available to them. For an Astartes can remain operational for days at a time without requiring any sustenance, they can go without sleep, and maintain a level of undiminished focus whilst operational. So advanced and significant are the changes in the physiology of an Astartes, they can even operate underwater or in the vacuum of space for short periods of time. Their body can rapidly heal small wounds, seal more significant injuries, seeing them able to fight on even should they suffer traumatic physical damage that would be terminal in ordinary humans. But all of their physical augmentations are supported by some of the heaviest personal armor available to humans within Imperium. Power 10 armor tons. Consists of ceramite plating locked onto the frame of an Astartes to form a fully enclosed suit. This is then articulated with dense fiber bundles and servos that not only enable the wearer to move, but significantly increase their strength. And while non-Astartes such as Sororitas or Inquisitors may be seen to wear variations of power armor, but these are specially scaled and adapted to enable those users to move with a level of dexterity, because power armor is very large and very bulky. Astartes, though, are gifted with an augmentation that only they are capable of enduring, known as the Black Carapace. This sits below their skin and is a critical augmentation to enable them to interface with power armor in the neural nodes that are studded throughout their body. In the development of the Space Marines, this Black Carapace is known to have been one of the most difficult augmentations to develop and implement, and was in fact nearly written off. Eventually, though, it was successful and enabled the Space Marines to move and fight in their power armor as if they were not wearing it at all. And this is one of the major differences which separates Space Marines and unaugmented humans, for which trying to wear this kind of power armor and move with any reasonable dexterity would be all but impossible. And while all of these adaptations are
I do gotta play this game though. I really do.
Undoubtedly impressive and enable each Astartes to be effectively a walking tank, able to utilize a vast arsenal of weapons and tools to reach their maximum potential at all times, there is a significant price to pay. For while they may live lives far beyond the span of an ordinary human and remain untouched by all but the very worst plagues and diseases, to deploy with a strength of force and focus and wield the tactics to devastate and overwhelm the very worst enemies of mankind, bolstered by the machines of war to ensure that few if any could stand against them, the cost for all of this remains their humanity. Space Marines undoubtedly consider them,
except the black guys with red eyes, who seem to have a little bit of their humanity there. They still fuck with
themselves part of human civilization. Many are known for their great ability to philosophize, craft masterworks of art, or spend centuries perfecting their martial skills. Yet, it remains impossible to ignore the fact that they are gigantic superhuman warriors who spend minimal time in any activity that one would consider part of humanity. Given that Astartes spend their days battling among the worst theatres of war imaginable, the most visible role they take on, which brings them into contact with ordinary humans, is in the role of custodians or overseers of their territory and planets. For example, within the realm of Ultramar, home to the Ultramarines chapter, the vast territory here is divided into 5 sectors, each overseen by a ruling Astartes tetrarch. These overseers generally help guide and marshal the human governors and various administrative bodies who maintain a cohesive and stable authority. They may also appear on scouting missions or in an advisory capacity to ongoing campaigns, but this is largely the limit of their involvement with most mortal humans' day-to-day activities. Because while they may be seen as the saviours of humanity, the angels of death, the ultimate defenders who know no fear, and remain the Emperor's bulwark against the terror, Space Marines are truly monstrous. This is the exploration of character we see in figures like Demetrian Titus. Because to know and understand how a Space Marine operates...
Demetrian Titus? Is that his full name? What the fuck? Demetrius?
To live your life with only one certainty, that you will die in service to the Emperor of mankind, underscores the fact that for Astartes, their existence is for one purpose and one purpose only: war.
Hell yeah.
I will just note that from this point on, there are no major spoilers for the game of Space Marine 2 itself, but I obviously will be discussing in detail existing lore around Titus. This includes some of the small observations from previews and speculative discussion adjacent to the character of Titus. All this includes some known aspects and entities of the Space Marine 2 game that have been revealed to us officially so far. So for any and all who wish to go into the game clean, this is your full warning. For those who want a more solid underpinning of Titus, we continue on.
Demetrian Titus. That's
While many Space Marines will see their service recorded from inception to their inevitable demise, others lead more fragmented, twisting personal histories.
Alright, Demetrian Titus.
Sometimes we'll even see them set apart from their brothers within the chapter.
What the fuck is that?
Sometimes we'll
This bitch big as shit. Oh my god.
Even see them set apart from their brothers within the chapter. Very often, this may be due to some event or dishonourable conduct that may or may not have been within their own control. Nonetheless, the responsibility always lands with the individual Marine and almost face the weight that comes with being an Astartes of the Emperor's Imperium. A Space Marine who is found to have slipped or otherwise lacking within any key aspect of their duty may be temporarily sent to atone for their shortcomings, and this could mean assignment to a troubled backwater world, administrative duty, overcoming a personal flaw through the completion of a challenging mission or historically chapter appropriate quest, or some other miscellaneous area of service. In the most severe scenarios where one's faith or loyalty are questioned, They may even face interrogation by chaplains or even the Inquisition.
I know they tore his ass
There
up.
would exist no standardized period for this to take place over either, and it could mean months, years, even centuries of isolation,
No
with
way.
the testing of an individual's character and spirit by the
Holy
most
shit.
extreme means. This was the reality that Demetrian Titus would face in the aftermath of the events upon Graia. This would mark a dark chapter in his own personal history that even now remains largely shrouded in secrecy. Titus was born upon the agriworld of Tarantus, which sits within the realm known as Ultramar. This region of the galaxy has been defended and governed by the Ultramarines since before the heresy. Tarantus is part of a tri-system group known as the Three Planets, along with Quintan and Massili. The system and Tarantus have not existed though in calm isolation, having seen invasions by both Orc and Demons of the Warp, but given their status as part of Ultramar, both were purged and retained as key worlds within the domain of the Ultramarines. The planet itself is characterized by an arid environment, its inhabitants deploying extensive water traps to extract moisture from the dry landscape. Within its vast domed cities that are designed to maintain a more productive environment, they enable the populace to produce large quantities of food which are then shipped off-world and support other planets and systems within Ultramar. Titus was an only child from a modest family, but selected as a prospective candidate for the Astartes by selectors of the Ultramarines, a great honour in an...
So they really just, it's seen as a great honor. So they really are just like going around, I see potential in you, grab your kid, and then that's it. You say no? I wonder if you could just say no, be like, no, I don't think so.
Of itself.
Probably not.
Space Marine chapters may choose candidates for potential conversion from all manner of worlds and personal backgrounds, some even from lives as criminals before entering the trials to become an Astartes. There is almost no restriction on where a chapter may draw
Almost? That means there is?
Candidates from, and each chapter will be looking for specific criteria to meet their needs. After his successful induction and conversion to becoming an Astartes, Titus proved to be a formidable member of the Ultramarines, and within a mere 50 years had already risen through the ranks to become a decorated member of the renowned Second Company.
Titus
Unfortunately,
really was,
when the legendary battle for Macragge took place, which saw the Xenos known as the Tyranids bring the Ultramarines' homeworld to its knees, Titus was serving far from Macragge. And as the conflict raged, astropathic distress signals had been sent, but few were able to breach the smothering psychic wall produced by the Tyranids known as the Shadow in the Warp. A few, however, managed to reach out into the galaxy, and many deployed companies and strike teams of the Ultramarines raced to return and aid in the defense of their Primarch's world and Ultramar itself. Titus and the Second Company would arrive too late to directly defend against the invasion, but their numbers were critical in scouring all remaining Xenos from the surface of Macragge and the other worlds that were already being assaulted by splinters of the nightmare creatures from Hive Fleet Behemoth. In the aftermath of this infamous battle, the Ultramarines veteran First Company had been all but annihilated, and the chapter itself had to be substantially rebuilt. The then Second Company Captain Severus was promoted to the First Company, which then saw Lucian Trajan as the new Second Company Captain. His command squad sergeant was none other than Demetrian Titus himself.
Hell yeah.
It would be in this period that Titus would learn how to most effectively deal with the Tyranid menace, as he and the Second Company were deployed in numerous operations to remove the remaining splinters of that Xenos from across the many worlds of Ultramar. And what Titus learned from these deployments was the critical need to assess an enemy first-hand. And while some commanders may be content to sit aboard the bridge of a ship and assess incoming data to formulate a strategy, Titus found that personal experience and on-the-ground engagement was considerably more effective in creating...
What does that mean? Just fuck it, just go in there, or like send other troops to scout, or
a successful strategy. Captain Trajan and Titus would stand together against the enemies of humanity for nearly a century, until fate would determine a new path for Titus. The Xenos known to humanity as the Eldari or Eldar invaded an Imperial world,
What the fuck? Well, this the space elves, right?
Beta Arcturus. And as is often the case for a Xenos known to have inhabited the galaxy millions of years before humanity emerged, this planet was once considered part of their own empire. But unlike so many of the horrors that face the Imperium, the Eldar are sometimes more civilized by degrees, and so the humans were given an ultimatum: evacuate immediately within 9 hours, or face their
9
war
hours,
host.
bro. Holy shit.
Over a week later, as the Ultramarines' second company, led by Trajan, arrived, they found a world ablaze. The Eldar of craft world Bieltan had laid waste to the Imperial cities, and the Astartes set about redressing the balance immediately. Drop pods and Thunderhawks rained down upon the world, and soon after, Trajan was already facing the Eldar commander, their autarch, in single combat. He would slay the Xenos leader, with Titus leading the command squad, carving a path through their aspect warriors who had formed a bodyguard contingent. Yet the Eldari had, in the chaos of battle, captured one of the Astartes, a battle brother of Titus.
Oh, a
Leandros.
brother. Oh, Leandros.
Trajan led a squad to recover him, but as is typical of the Eldari, it was a ploy to lure the Astartes into an ambush.
He's dead already?
Something that any Space Marine would entirely expect, but the numbers not committed to the battlefield surrounded Trajan and in short order cut him down. Titus and the Strike Force would recover Trajan's body and purge the remaining Xenos from the world, but the cost of victory had been considerably higher than any would have expected. Chapter Master Calgar would
Ain't gonna lie, I fuck with how they roll for Brodo, man. They say, bro, one of us is captured, we gonna go back and retrieve him.
Aftermath assigned the regrettably vacant position of company captain to Titus. By the time Orcs began to invade the Forge world of Graia, Titus had already been captain of the second company for a decade and led an exemplary record against all enemies of the Imperium. Yet within Titus, there existed a personal trait that would lead him down a path few could have expected for one with such a service history, for Titus had always been one to lead a little too strongly. He did not show restraint where others may have, and more importantly, did not always demonstrate enough self-reflection. For even among the Astartes, they are more than capable of displaying all too human flaws, as was evidenced throughout the heresy. But this is the entire...
Yeah, the heresy is like a big ass example of that shit for sure. That's why when he said like lose your humanity, I mean, I guess it's like, in what way? Like, I mean, I guess I don't really think you tie all, you tie all the human flaws into the, I guess, definition of humanity, right?
The purpose of the Codex Astartes.
I know what he
provide
meant by
structure, answers, and a set of principles to generally abide by. Upon Graia, Titus came into contact with a power source that demonstrated he held an unusual resistance to warp power.
Yeah,
this immediately raised
bro.
Suspicions among his battle brothers, including Leandros. Yet rather than heed their concerns, Titus believed only he was capable of completing the task at hand. This would lead to his eventual detention and interrogation by the Inquisition.
Oh, fuck,
Yet
that's
his
why.
discipline as an Ultramarine would in the long term prove to be his salvation. For Titus had willingly surrendered himself to Inquisitor Thrax on Graia without resistance or excessive protestation. Despite the outraged calls from his companions, Titus recognized the Inquisitor's authority over all Imperial subjects, and despite being adamant that he was no heretic and had not strayed from the teachings of his chapter, Primarch and Emperor, to have turned against an Inquisitor would have been an effective death sentence and admission of guilt in the eyes of those who suspected him of even unwitting warp corruption, and ultimately, yes, heresy. Titus would now be forced to endure the ultimate dishonor and humiliation, but fate had determined his path. In the fullness of time, his experiences would forever alter his view of Inquisitors, and understandably so, but any freedom to exercise those views would not present itself for a considerable amount of time. This is where Titus disappeared out of sight and record, leaving the second company of the Ultramarines without a commander. This was when Cato Sicarius, the now legendary captain of the second company, would be assigned that position.
Damn.
Titus, though, would spend over a century being assessed and interrogated by the Inquisition, spending large periods of that time in
Holy
stasis.
shit.
While the details are
Over a
omitted,
century.
such interrogations are known to be brutal in both physical and psychic punishments upon an individual, to break them down, learn all that an Inquisitor can about whatever threat and, if possible, what knowledge one may have toward the forces that could be manipulating them. For the forces of chaos and the warp work in very strange ways, and it's common for an individual to not even realize that they may have been manipulated by the dark entities of the warp. Those who dwell within darkness do not recognize the timescales of mortals either, and so a plan could be seeded by those of the warp decades, even centuries in advance. These would be aspects of Titus's proximity to the warp powers and chaos beings upon Graia that the Inquisition wished to
Damn, do we see this shit in the game?
establish.
I guess.
The detention of Titus came at the protestations of Marneus Calgar, chapter master of the Ultramarines. Titus would not be released, and in fact was never released. He only emerged from the depths of confinement due to the ironic possession of the Inquisitor who had detained him. For during the purging of a corrupted
He said the ironic possession? What the fuck?
Astartes chapter, Inquisitor Thrax himself was possessed by a demon of the warp.
Holy
This saw him immediately
shit, that's
executed
hilarious.
by the Grey Knights who were conveniently alongside him during that deployment. And this of course left
Ooh.
Titus and many others that had been detained by Thrax in something of a limbo state. They would not be released until a team of Astartes from the Red Hunters chapter were dispatched to investigate this inquisitorial outpost, to which they soon discovered numerous Space Marines imprisoned within. All were held in stasis and so were not subject to the passage of time, for this is often the case when dealing with long open periods of interrogation and assessment. The Inquisitor leading the team of Astartes to assess the holdings of Inquisitor
Damn,
Thrax
she bad as
did not
fuck.
call for the immediate destruction of all Astartes held here, which they very well could have done. Instead, they were to be passed on to the Death Watch in the fortress of Watcher Keep for further evaluation. Like so many Astartes before him, Titus now entered a period of effective penance within the Death Watch. The Death Watch are a highly
Like the Night Watch.
specialized chapter of Space Marines who do not follow the template of most others, yet they're still loyal to the Imperium and the Emperor, for they are seen to be tasked with the most dangerous alien threats to the Imperium,
Really
and
is the
unlike other
Night's Watch.
chapters, consist of generally veteran warriors from innumerable Space Marine chapters all throughout the Imperium. They are located in these so-called Watch Fortresses, which are spread all across the galaxy, and from here they stand ready to strike against any calls from the Inquisition or to respond to immediate Xenos incursions which might threaten humanity. These warriors are called to serve in the Death Watch in what is known as the Long Vigil. Often this will be for veteran Astartes who have demonstrated considerable skill and acumen in service and will be inducted for what is officially a limited period of time, after which they may return to their original chapter.
Oh,
In actuality, most
you could go
will
back.
never see their
Okay.
chapter
Oh, never
again.
mind.
Few, if any, though, would decline such an assignment, for to join the Death Watch is considered a great honour and a solemn duty, for they are the elite Xenos hunting wing of the Inquisition's Ordo Xenos, long-serving Marines who have demonstrated outstanding prowess, strategic insight, or have had significant encounters with specific alien species, are often chosen to bolster the effectiveness of Death Watch kill teams. Service in the Death Watch also allows Astartes to share and acquire valuable knowledge and tactics from the brothers of other chapters, fostering inter-chapter cooperation and strengthening the Imperium's overall defense. For those who do return to their chapter, the experience gained during this tenure enhances not only the individual's capabilities, but also benefit their chapter upon.
I wonder if some of them like returned to their chapter and ended up like becoming like captain of that chapel, since like the Chesed Chapel chapter, since they've got enhanced capabilities.
Their return, bringing with them advanced and up-to-date combat techniques, as well as strategic intelligence critical for future engagements with said Xenos forces. Yet there is another role that can see one inducted into the Death Watch: the Penitent. This is a Marine serving penance in the Death Watch that could have been demanded by their leadership within the chapter, but it could also be voluntary. For, say, a chapter that fell to chaos, but as was seen in the heresy itself, not all members of a legion or chapter automatically are corrupted. Some who remain loyal may then choose to serve in the Death Watch in shame if accepted as a form of penance. These Marines are most usually designated as an anonymous Marine known as a Black Shield. They're seen to bear no chapter mark, with their right armor pauldron displaying only featureless black or the silver skull of the Death Watch. This ancient tradition emerged during the heresy, and it was a means by which a Space Marine from a disgraced legion could continue to serve on, fighting against the traitors.
Let me get this straight.
So it is in the...
So I'm just in a chapter, and like some of my peoples ended up becoming heretics, and because of that, and I say, nah, I'm still loyal, and just because of that, I go to the Black Watch? Or do they go to the Black Watch too? Or I think I gotta go back. Nigga, if I gotta go to the Black Watch because my niggas is fucking heretics, is bullshit.
With heraldry obscured may present himself before a watch commander and petition for admittance to the Death Watch. He may not be questioned nor pressed to divulge anything about his origins, all such information having been ritually obliterated by the removal of his chapter's mark. To exist within the Death Watch as a Black Shield is no easy path, for most will avoid the company of other Astartes, remaining in self-imposed solitary isolation until the time of battle is upon them. It was to this reality that Titus now found himself facing, with little if any hope of being admitted back into the Ultramarines. Titus had been entirely isolated since his detention upon Graia by Inquisitor Thrax, and so as far as he was aware, such a significant period of time had elapsed that he now believed, in the eyes of his brothers, he had been effectively subjected to censure and would never return. Of course, unknown to Titus, the reality was entirely the opposite. Titus would fight on. He would not abandon service to the Imperium and the Emperor, for as the famous imperial quotation states, only in death does duty end. Of course, on the other hand, it was the Ultramarines Primarch Rabute Gilliman himself who said of that quote, only in death does duty end, is no way to live. Unfortunately for Titus, this was the way by which he would live from here on. Yet he held no more of a personal desire to claim glory in the eyes of others than he had during his service in the Ultramarines, and while that may have been true, it did not necessarily mean that he'd always followed the path as laid out within the Codex Astartes. Titus chose a new name for himself while serving in the Death Watch, Nullus, and fully embraced his new
Nullus is tough
identity as an anonymous Black Shield. He served as now merely a tool of the Emperor. He existed devoid of personality and brotherhood that he had known through all his years in the chapter. Now he was devoted fully to destroying the very worst enemies facing humanity until he would meet his eventual inevitable demise. During the Fourth Tyrannic War, which saw the greatly feared Tyranid threat re-emerge in Segmentum Pacificus and would see Hive Fleet Leviathan launch a devastating invasion both here and into the Imperium's most critical Segmentum Solar, the Tyranids were soon observed to be significantly problematic, having adapted their tactics and evolved new bioforms to overwhelm Imperial defences. The conflict saw the involvement of various Space Marine chapters, Astra Militarum regiments and other Imperial forces, and one of the key aspects of this war was the unprecedented level of coordination between Imperial forces, including joint operations and the use of advanced strategies to counter the Tyranid swarm. Something which was in small part due to the deployment of teams such as the Death Watch, who had early on been called to engage against this new threat, and after all who had significant experience in fighting these particular Xenos. something which fast proved entirely necessary, as many among humanity's defenders in the region had no real comprehension of the foe they faced. At this time, most recorded assaults from the Tyranids had originated on the far side of the Imperium's eastern galactic region, and so those here in Pacificus and Solar were entirely inexperienced. While deploying into the Residius system to reinforce Imperial Guard forces, Titus and their Corvus Blackstar was downed by flying Tyranid bioforms. Those who survived found themselves facing the horrifying numbers of aliens upon the surface. Titus would be wounded severely by a Tyranid Carnifex. With most others already dead around him, he prepared for the end.
Let's just say
Yet by another twist of fate, he would now find himself reunited with his chapter. The Ultramarines were deployed here as part of a strike force to relieve the Death Watch. Despite the heavy losses and the sheer ferocity of the Tyranids, the Imperium managed to slow the advance of High Fleet Leviathan, though the war still remains ongoing and the outcome uncertain. But it was at this time that the Ultramarines had answered the screaming astropathic cries for aid that had been received throughout the galaxy as the Fourth Tyrannic War emerged. The Imperium in this time was already struggling to hold back the tides of darkness. With the emergence of the Cicatrix Maledictum, the Great Rift, the Ultramarines Primarch launching his Indomitus Crusade, and Ultramar itself only having recently emerged bloodied by the plague wars of the Death Guard. Yet among those of the Ultramarines' First Company, who are well known as the Tyrannic Veterans, having survived the Tyrannic War in Ultramar and upon Macragge, promoted into the new First Company in the aftermath of that war, now as the Fourth Tyrannic War took hold, the First Company were headed at speed towards this new High Fleet, along with the First Captain Severus. They also carried with them Chief Librarian Varro Tigurius, one of the most powerful Psykers among all Astartes in the galaxy. For Tigurius is so powerful, he can operate as a battlefield commander, a psychic storm of annihilation when focused upon their enemies, and also an ethereal presence which can reach across the galaxy. And it would be he who detected the soul sign of the lost warrior they still knew as Demetrian Titus. The strike force, launched from Tigurius' vessel, hit the planet like a strike from the ancient gods, and with Thunderhawks deploying veteran squads of Tyrannic warfare, the Xenos were soon being readily exterminated. Tragically, they had arrived too late to save the planet, but not too late to save Titus, who was recovered and urgently placed into Apothecarian bays aboard the Righteous Fury, the same vessel that he had Captain Trajan. Titus was wounded so severely that it was quickly established he could not be saved in his current form as a firstborn Marine. The only thing that could be enacted were the so-called Calgarian rites, his transition to becoming a Primaris Marine. Like so many who had crossed the Primaris Rubicon before him, Titus emerged stronger and more resolute than ever before, not least to find himself in the company of his brothers within the Ultramarines once again. Even more so when he awoke to find himself bestowed with the rank of lieutenant, serving under Captain Sevastus Acheran of the Second Company. Not all, of course, were so pleased to see the immediate return of Titus. Many still had questions, suspicions even, about where he had been for so long and what had transpired. Yet the exploration within the mind and soul of Titus...
Why'd they need questions? I thought they knew that he was locked up.
...by Chief Librarian Tigurius should have immediately laid to rest any such concerns, for Tigurius found no sign of any corruption within him. His rank was reinstated by psychic communion with Marneus Calgar himself. The approval of the Chief Librarian and Chapter Master was an adamantine seal of approval that none should dare to question. So it was that Titus was reinstated as a member of the Ultramarines, having been dragged through the disgrace of inquisitorial suspicion, the humility of penance serving as a black shield, yet now finally emerging in the era that saw his Primarch Robuta Gilliman return to the Ultramarines and to lead the Imperium as Lord Commander. Titus was back where he belonged, to serve once more within the Second Company and to bring the unstoppable wrath of his chapter and the Emperor to all the enemies of the Imperium, as Titus remained under the ever-watchful eye of Marneus Calgar.
Kind of a fire. The Theater of Redemption. Shit.
In the era of M41 and humanity's great empire, the galaxy stands shrouded in a stagnating fog of ignorance, pure confusion, and widespread misinformation. With the return of the Ultramarines Primarch Roboute Guilliman, after extensive study, he concluded that the destabilized state of the galaxy, most especially in the shadow of the emergence of the Great Rift Warp that split the Imperium in two, it was now impossible to determine an accurate course of time as it had been recorded to that point. It is believed that in the contemporary Imperium, because of this galactic scale of disruption, time flows erratically across different regions of the galaxy, leading to events occurring out of sync or even fully out of sequence. This destabilizing situation can even cause entire star systems to become temporarily isolated, or more generally galactic communications to just be very unreliable. For the Imperium of Man, this has had a profound impact. Coordination of military campaigns had already been historically difficult, but the situation now only further exacerbated confusion and disorder across the Imperium. This did nothing to improve the fact that humanity still faced relentless wars and constant incursions by Xenos heretics from within the Imperium itself, and of course the forces of chaos. The result of all this disruption is that many systems within the Imperium have scant or outdated information available, even for the most elite such as the Adeptus Astartes. Whilst it remains critical that those at the forefront of the Imperium's defences have access to such information, they will often find themselves operating with incomplete or wholly inaccurate intelligence. They may be dispatched to worlds with little knowledge of the current state of affairs, encountering unexpected threats, or finding entire planets lost to the warp or overrun by enemies long before their arrival. While historically, due to the nature of travel in the galaxy and the delays caused by Imperial bureaucracy, this may always have been true, the situation was now ever more pronounced. Quite obviously, any attempt to make efficient strategic planning became near impossible, and the lack of reliable information could lead to often disastrous outcomes. In the recent Tyrannic War, which saw Titus and his Death Watch crippled by the ferocity of the Tyranids, it was a prime example of how even where Astartes commanders are forced into relying on their instincts, adaptability, and the fragmented reports they receive, by the time they're able to enter a conflict and begin piecing together the true situation, this occurs only when they're already deep into the fray. So while Titus may have been accepted back into the Ultramarines chapter, he has much to prove among his battle brothers, and nothing short of exemplary action will suffice. The Residia system is currently deemed critical by the Imperium. The specific reasons for this, though, remain unknown. But with a strong Mechanicus presence, there is undoubtedly something deeper occurring here that has warranted such a heavy response from the Imperium. One would like to imagine that with Kadaku, a Death World Mechanicus research outpost, only having a population of
43 minutes is the end of the lore video. Either that theories and speculation and stuff. That's when I start watching. The last little segment part.
A few 100 million, and its neighbour Demetrian, a barrier world that is effectively uninhabited. The main reason for a strong response would be the population of the hive world Avarax within the Residia system, numbering some near 200 billion souls, not to mention its immense production output. In reality, if we know anything of the Imperium, it is far more likely that whatever has caused the designation of this system as being strategic value absolute, it is most likely not the vast numbers of humans upon the world. For while those among the Astartes would prioritize the salvation of such vast numbers of human lives as they could, the Mechanicus would the salvation of the world. For while those among the Astartes would prioritize the salvation of such vast numbers of human lives if they could, the Mechanicus would most certainly not. In the aftermath of his retrieval from Kadaku, it becomes evident for Titus that this is far from the end, and that his journey toward redemption begins here and now in the system of Residius. With their defences crumbling and the populations falling into despair, Titus may have emerged from the Death Watch and returned to the Ultramarines, but his life as an Astartes has immediately presented him with yet another problem: strict adherence to the mission or the billions of citizens at stake upon Avarax. perhaps he can achieve both. Yet the Titus now is a very different man.
I'm about to say, now he's completely different after spending all that time.
To the captain who
both is crazy.
Waged a singular campaign against the Xenos Orcs and the heretic Inquisitor and Chaos Astartes upon Graia. His risk-taking and somewhat cavalier attitude back then has been all but beaten out of him, and now he stands as a more pragmatic, objective individual with a clearer understanding of just what is at stake for the system and himself personally. In Space Marine 2, all of these details are delivered to us through not merely dialogue, but the personal actions, engagements between the characters, and the environment around them.
I wonder if I'm going to be able to remember like little bits and pieces as I play through the game. I will eventually play this game.
And for the small preview I have seen, the storytelling unfolds with an attention to detail that demonstrates to us the change we see in Titus. Residius represents his best opportunity for redemption.
Which is fucking crazy to think about, considering like now I know how big this world is. You can drop an hour plus lore video on one certain character. Like, it's fucking wild.
In the eyes of his brother Astartes, the system's dire situation offers an immediate chance to prove he has atoned for his past through securing a vital world for the Imperium. Utilizing his experience and skills developed in the Death Watch will be critical in his attempt to overcome the sheer scale of the challenges facing the system, a task that only a warrior of his caliber and his Primaris brothers can hope to secure in turning the tide against the Xenos horrors. For Titus's mission in Residius is not just a battle against the enemies of humanity, it is a deeply personal crusade, having been thrown back into the crucible of Xenos war so immediately after his return to the Ultramarines. One of the foremost issues in his mind is to reclaim his honour. Marneus Calgar had insisted that he be assigned the rank of lieutenant, even though Titus himself felt he was not deserving of such a rank and should have been more severely demoted. The defence of Residius is a critical point in his life, for the weight of responsibility placed upon Titus here is immense. To emerge victorious, he must inspire and command the brothers who accompany him and stand resolute against an almost incomprehensible scale of enemy. Such, though, is the life of an Astartes. Titus had at one point all but accepted his life as a Black Shield, and that he would most likely die in anonymous service to the Emperor and the Imperium. Yet here, on the ravaged world of Avarax, he sees a sliver of possibility to achieve redemption, to fully restore his reputation, and finally bring peace to the ghosts of his past. As the story unfolds, it is not merely the fate of Residius at hand, but that of Titus's personal redemption. For the two are intertwined. Only in victory will Titus be able to finally lay to rest the shame and suspicion that has shadowed him for so long. But dark forces are always working.
Fuck, that shit looks so tough.
Against him. This itself could be far more complex though than we may imagine, and the unfolding events of the campaign could still hold confusing aspects and suspicions that we are as yet still blind to. What are the Mechanicus doing within the Residius system? Why have they so recently resurrected activities here? And despite all the assessments and analysis of Titus himself, even by Tigurius, an air of unease in the eyes of his brother Marines still hangs around him. His past haunts like a permanent stain upon his character, and one that must surely be finally laid to rest here, or otherwise condemn him to a life of unbearable suspicion and penance.
Questions remain.
In this section, we stray into the realm of the speculative, but still entirely grounded within the possibilities of both the lore and personal character of Titus. Primarily, what we are considering here is the long-term manipulation of individuals by the beings of the Warp, specifically Tzeentch, the Great Changer of the Ways. Although I also wanted to speak to the character of Astartes and also the way in which they choose to approach things and why, specifically in this instance Titus and Leandros. From the previews we have seen so far in Space Marine 2, We know that Tzeentch will be a faction in the game, and so it is fair to assume that they will play an important aspect in the campaign as it unfolds for Titus and his Marines. This raises the larger questions. Will they remain disconnected from the personal journey of Titus, or will it have a deeper meaning and a narrative connotation?
Yeah, I was thinking that it might have like a narrative connotation to what's called Titus. I was thinking because I was thinking like what was Tzeentch specifically like represent? What does it represent? I couldn't remember though, but I was thinking, oh, maybe that might be connected to what Titus's journey will end up becoming towards the end of the game, maybe, or something.
I can honestly say I do not know, but it seems to me at least an interesting question that is worth exploring, not least when we consider the words of Nemeroth, the Chaos Marine, at the heart of the conflict upon Graia, which saw Titus able to resist the powers of Nemeroth and even the warp itself. And this was something that Titus and his brothers were both confused and concerned by, which brings us, of course, to Leandros. Leandros was one of the newer members of Titus's command squad, and had demonstrated a trait often present in those who have successfully survived through to becoming an Astartes, that of a relative disconnect between the form they exist as now versus that of their prior humanity. It's not uncommon for Space Marines to display a cold indifference to mortal humans, and a tendency to look at things from the bigger picture. At face value, it's very easy to feel a dislike towards Space Marines with this outlook. They seem very cold, emotionless, uncaring about individuals. But in actuality, becoming an Astartes is to see the galaxy entirely differently, because you no longer look at that small-scale personal level as most humans do. Such an outlook comes with the position of becoming an Astartes. It's also why many Inquisitors see actions at a scale far above even the planetary. Some Astartes are better at balancing this than others, and it's something they may adjust from their experience over time. Some chapters of Space Marines are also known to display more empathy to standard humans than others, such as the Salamanders, where other chapters would see ordinary humans as
Salamanders. He made a mention of it. That's who they were, the Salamanders.
Others, and it's something they may adjust from their experience over time. Some chapters of Space Marines are also known to display more empathy to standard humans than others, such as the Salamanders, where other chapters would see ordinary humans as little more than a means to an end, or just even numbers on a data slate. It's fair to say, though, that Leandros did not endear himself with his immediate character and his continual remonstrations with Titus. However, I've often spent time to consider, was this a fair assumption? Or was our view of Leandros more of an emotional reaction to someone who had seemingly become so disconnected from their humanity? And we'll talk about that more in a moment. But just to remind ourselves of that situation and the final events upon Graia. Titus had by the later stages of that campaign become determined to hunt down and kill the Chaos Sorcerer Nemeroth before he could harness the power of the Psychic Scourge, thereby fulfilling his plan to ascend to true demonhood.
What the fuck is that?
Having already shown a shocking plan to ascend to true demonhood.
They didn't tell you who it was. It was talking about Captain Titus.
Having already shown a shocking resistance to the warp powers at play, Titus remained resolute despite the very obvious dangers. Leandros, though, vehemently disagrees with Titus about continuing on. He continually asserts the instructions of the Codex laid down by their Primarch. Titus appears to brush this off entirely, in fact some would say showing a shocking disregard for the Codex despite being an Ultramarine. He seems to actively shun its instructions. I think to this end, it is worth remembering just what the Codex Astartes is and when it was written. So, the Codex Astartes was not created merely to act as a guide for chapter organization, tactics, and the general conduct of Space Marines. It does do those things, but Robute Guilliman, Primarch of the Ultramarines, created it as a vital tome which would incorporate all the lessons they had learned and in the shadow of the heresy, so that in the millennia to come, even beyond potentially his own life, the Astartes should never fall to darkness in the ways seen during the Horus heresy again, most notably resisting the corruption of chaos, because corruption from those of the warp was seen to be far more nuanced than any could have imagined. It did not take place in an acute form. It was not a pathogen or a virus that could easily be detected. It whispered in people's ears, it worked its way into their brain and their decisions, and it required a considerably strong framework to both resist and detect. So for this reason, among many others, in creating the Codex Astartes, Guilliman hoped to prevent the catastrophic events of the heresy from ever occurring again. And the arrival of the Codex coincided with one of the most significant events in the history of the Imperium, the dissolution of the Astartes legions and the replacement with chapters. The rationalization was that no single force should ever be able to rebel on the scale of the traitor legions again, for the risk of such an occurrence to the Imperium and the Emperor was simply too great. So, returning to Leandros and Titus, although Leandros appears nagging and a bit of a Boy Scout, versus Titus basically just winging it and using his instincts and his experience, it's worth further analysis because this leads directly into the situation we're about to discover in Space Marine 2. As discussed earlier, Titus during the events on Graia was, up to that point, an exemplary member of the Ultramarines. He had seen great success and commendation, but no Astartes exists without a sense of pride, and despite any assertions to the contrary. So I think it's more than clear that Titus was somewhat overconfident and even arrogant in his attitude. He had only seen success during his time as an Astartes, and that had seen him ascend to the captain of the second company in relative short order. So why should he not face the threats that become clear on Graia any differently, even though the warning signs were all there? Leandros was doing what he was expected to do as a member of the Ultramarines. He was giving his contrary opinion to his senior officer and reminding of the purposes in the Codex to enforce discipline and control within the Space Marine chapters, thereby reducing the risk of any individual or chapter falling to chaos. The Codex emphasizes the importance of vigilance, purpose, and adherence to the Emperor's will, teaching Space Marines to be ever wary of the insidious influence of chaos. By codifying these principles in the Codex Astartes, Guilliman sought to maintain the strength, unity, and integrity of the Astartes, even absent to his presence, guiding them in their service to the Imperium of Man while safeguarding them against the corrupting temptations of chaos. So it is all the more surprising that Titus repeatedly tosses aside Leandros' concerns, pointing out that Titus has repeatedly shown this unusual resistance to the warp, and specifically ever since Nemeroth's invasion of Graia, something as noted that even Nemeroth appears intrigued by Titus's resilience. And Titus...
Question for the comment section. What do you guys rate the Space Marines 2 game? Not just like gameplay, because I feel like I'm a light gameplay. I'm a big Gears of War fan growing up. I played all the Gears of Wars and stuff like that, and it kind of reminds me of that. But narratively, because now I'm getting like more in depth with like the lore, and I'm learning a few things. Like narratively, how do y'all feel about the story? About
continues to minimize these concerns, even when they learn that the Inquisitor involved here was dead right from the start and had merely been puppeted by Nemeroth. The situation should have been significantly concerning, and Leandros doesn't go so far as to just outright accuse Titus of heresy. He is simply voicing his fears that whatever is behind the captain's resistance to the warp might inadvertently aid Nemeroth and compromise their mission. Now, to be completely clear, no matter how things eventually turned out, that is far from being unreasonable advice, and despite the ultimate conclusion to the situation on Graia, Titus exhibited here a clear arrogance to ignore the more pragmatic evaluation and adherence to the Codex as generally seen and expected of the Ultramarines. Titus dismisses Leandros' concerns and sets off to confront Nemeroth, determined to prevent the sorcerer's ascension. In short, Titus continues to demonstrate this headstrong attitude that is his entire personality. Leandros is deeply troubled, and with fair reason. These are exactly the kind of behaviours that Astartes who have fallen in the past tend to display, and that Space Marines are taught to be very cautious of. It's more than reasonable that Leandros becomes convinced that Titus may well have been corrupted, because often this can happen without an individual even being aware of it. This, of course, culminates in Leandros contacting the Inquisition. Meanwhile, Titus successfully defeats Nemeroth and seemingly destroys the power source, closing that warp rift, securing victory just as Imperial reinforcements arrive. Despite this success, Titus is taken into custody by Inquisitor Thrax due to Leandros' accusations. And as Titus is led away, Leandros confronts him, insisting that the Codex Astartes clearly marks him as a heretic, arguing
Leandros whole ass, bro. Whole ass nigga.
that no one could resist the warp as Titus had without falling to corruption. Now, I hate to say it, but Leandros is 100% correct
I mean, yeah, bro, but like, you know what I'm saying? That's my nigga Titus, though, bro. Fuck that nigga.
here. He always gets the bad rap on the backside of this campaign, because of course Titus is the hero. But Leandros is fully justified in his actions here. In response, Titus asserts that the Codex Astartes is a guide that instills honor within the Ultramarines, but it is how each Space Marine chooses to live by those rules that truly defines them. Titus implies that in his rigid adherence to the Codex, Leandros has failed to grasp the deeper meaning and the true test of a Space Marine. The perspectives of both entirely questionable, because while it may be true that in this specific instance Titus was correct, he himself is also missing something. On balance, there is no clear-cut definitive answer, and perhaps that is entirely the point. Likely, Leandros needs to understand that to follow the Codex too rigidly in itself can invite disaster, something that has been historically demonstrated for the Ultramarines. But Titus also needed to more objectively understand that his flippancy to which he ignored the lessons of the Codex placed him in his current predicament and could have led to the entire failure of the mission and worse. Of course, it is difficult to really see, given the situation they were in, what Titus could have done differently. Graia had to be defended, Nemeroth had to be defeated. Whatever was occurring with Titus at the time was far less of a priority. However, that still does not discredit or dismiss the concerns of Leandros,
I love that transition, by the way.
which are fully justified. And that to me is the critical aspect to understand here. It's not about taking sides, it's understanding the complexity and difficulty for Astartes in trying to judge just what they should be doing in such a scenario. Titus implied in his passing statement that Leandros was incorrect in his actions, and that is where he himself was wrong. As Nemeroth said, only a deep connection to the warp could explain Titus's ability to resist it, and the Chaos Sorcerer even questions if this means Titus will soon be joining them. He can feel and detect something in Titus at that time. Presumably, this is something he's seen before, and that's the huge red flag here. Despite Titus surviving the interrogations of the Inquisitor and his subsequent time in the Death Watch, even the assessment of Chief Librarian Tigurius, there was something happening to him upon Graia that seemed to shake even the Chaos Sorcerer. Given that position, it's more than plausible that Leandros should raise a strong concern that required the involvement of both the Inquisition and the supporting Black Templars to ensure that Titus came quietly, because had he not, they likely would have executed him right there on the spot. There are far too many examples to consider where we have seen individuals of a resilient constitution still manipulated by chaos against their will, entirely unknowing that it was taking place at all until the very last moment. One of the most notable, which always comes to mind perhaps, is of course Inquisitor Sabathiel, who has seen more than her fair share of connection to the warp even in her resurrection. But it is just one example of somebody who had a powerful belief in their own actions, a clarity of vision, who was 100% certain they were taking the right course and they knew what they were doing, only to find themselves become a pawn in the great game of the Chaos Gods. And of course Sabathiel faced execution from the Grey Knights. The question regarding Titus and his ultimate status is an open one, and something that we may well learn more about through the Residius campaign. For while his own choices ultimately led to his penance within the Death Watch, the resistance he had to chaos was seemingly not of his own making. In the fullness of time,
I don't think any of you guys said, yeah, because I'm assuming it's all speculation, and maybe the answer will just be told in like the second game. I ain't gonna lie, low key, I might have been spoiled because it doesn't even seem like in the chat, and I mean in the in the comment section that there was like a specific answer on the reason why he is just resistant to chaos and resistant to fear and stuff like that happened in the secret level episode.
Time Titus's commitment to a path that, while not easy, could ultimately become far more important historically, could well be the path the Emperor laid out for Titus. I feel a relevant adjacent example to put in here regarding the need to remain open to the interpretation of rules comes from the legendary Ultramarine Aeonid Thiel. Thiel was a sergeant during the heresy, and it had become part of the Ultramarines' identity to emulate their Primarch and Forge theoreticals to best protect and counter against all the enemies of mankind. Thiel, though, was judged to have gone too far when he theorized that they should also begin considering the possibility of having to combat Space Marines as well as Xenos. It's important to remember that in this time before the heresy broke out into the open, the concept of an Astartes fighting another was considered all but impossible, and that even voicing this was tantamount to treason. For his theoreticals, Thiel was marked for censure. Effectively, this was a disciplinary punishment, and his helmet was marked red for this reason. Yes, at this time, the word-bearers Traitor Marines,
little did they know, man, they gave that nigga forever drip,
unleashed their infamous assault upon Calth.
Thiel
saved a chapter master from a demon incursion and would follow this with his theoretical that in a battle against their fellow Marines, the Ultramarines' greatest weakness was their staunch predictability, while the word-bearers' greatest advantage was the shock of their betrayal. The only way for the Ultramarines to regain the initiative would be to dispense with both. They should use unorthodox tactics and strategies to wage a brutal campaign against their former brethren with all ferocity, entirely uncharacteristic for the Ultramarines. During the Battle of Calth, Guilliman ordered that all squad leaders accompanying him paint their helmets red because the word-bearers' attack had shredded the Ultramarines' normal command hierarchy and organization, and also communication was very unreliable. Guilliman wanted clear visual markers for the Ultramarines to follow. In the aftermath, Thiel's visionary heroism and theoretical prompted Guilliman to enshrine that red markings would now be a badge of honor instead of censure, something that the Ultramarines continue to carry in their aesthetics to the contemporary Imperium some 10,000 years later, where all sergeants now wear the red helmet. Now, beside Aeonid Thiel being one of my favourite Space Marines in the history of 40k, what is the point of this story? Well, it seeks to illustrate that there is a need, as Titus demonstrated, to sometimes take a path that is not the easy choice so long as the theoretical is sound. And that is something that their Primarch has always been clear on, to hear all sides no matter if they appear at face value problematic, because that is the genius of Guilliman.
Find out, bro. Ultramarines really got some dope-ass characters, man. Real dope-ass characters.
This was the true failing of Leandros. He was too closed-minded, but Titus's failing was in not heeding the warnings of the Codex sufficiently. It was an impossible situation, and one which can only be concluded in this coming campaign, because with the presence of Tzeentch clearly seen to be operating in the Residius campaign, Titus needs to lay to rest the unanswered questions about this ability to resist the warp. Why the voices from the Immaterium were so keenly asking him, "Will you be joining us soon, brother?" Was there puppetry at play here? There are very likely other unseen actors who will lead us into a final act that may resolve the question of Titus once and for all. The fundamental principle, though, is the danger of chaos. For chaos corruption can occur openly or inwardly, consciously or unconsciously. And even when it does not have a clear answer, one way or the other, the events upon Graia demonstrated how it can divide and break the bonds between loyal brothers of the Astartes, just as it did in the heresy. This is one of the most enduring, ever-present dangers that face Space Marines, and has not changed since the final end of that great war. The big question, of course, is, what are the sorcerers of the Thousand Suns doing here? What powers or ceremonies do they seek to unleash, and how critical will the strength of Titus be in unlocking whatever mysteries they seek to conceal? The Demetrian Titus of this campaign will not be that same individual we saw upon Graia. He is an entirely changed figure who has hopefully learned that the most challenging of personal journeys for an Astartes, and specifically for an Ultramarine, is to balance the strength of one's own individual instincts and experiences and ego and pride against those that are taught by the hallowed Codex Astartes. For in this campaign, Titus will be a distinctly more grounded individual, and with his new Ultima brothers by his side, Titus will bring his experience, insight, and tutelage to the new Primaris Marines of the Second Company, Chiron and Gadriel.
And Astartes Odyssey.
Warhammer 40,000 is more than just a setting for games and novels. It's a living narrative that immerses us in the darkest of futures where humanity's survival exists on a knife edge. Simply put, there are so many ways to enjoy the setting of 40k that how we approach Space Marine 2 itself will be entirely individual. Many appreciated recently my long static gaze at the background of the game in the recent preview, but others wanted far superior gameplay than I could hope to provide. And then there are of course those who want nothing more than to just see and experience the new narrative of Titus explored. All of this highlights how 40k, with its deep lore, myriad factions, and relentless background of war, isn't just about experiencing a new game. It's about diving headfirst into the world of 40k in a way that feels both familiar yet also thrillingly new. Within the galaxy of M41, the stakes are incredibly high, and the lines between heroism and damnation often blurred. It's often said that there are no good guys or bad guys in 40k. A very debatable point, but one which hammers home the
there's some bad niggas. Yeah, there's definitely some bad niggas. Nah, for sure.
ethical weight placed upon the decisions facing the characters in such times. For myself, I always want to see a game that embodies the relentless, brutal nature of 40k, where sacrifices have to be made and the grim realities of war are ever present. This means not just engaging in epic battles against waves of Tyranids and other Xenos, but also feeling the weight of the lore, seeing the decay of ancient worlds, hearing the hymns and accounts of the Adeptus Mechanicus as they maintained their war machines, breaking through Xenos and heretic nests and shrines, crushing traitor Astartes, walking among those ordinary citizens of the Imperium and experiencing the desperate prayers of the Astra Militarum as they hold the line. For me, one of the most exciting aspects also for Space Marine 2 is the promise of the broad spectrum of missions which will take us through a host of environments, from claustrophobic hive-like structures and gothic crenellations to the choking jungles of a death world or the desolate wastelands of an Imperial cemetery world. All should help us to deepen our immersion, because I want Space Marine 2 to take us deep into the heart of the 40k setting. One of the most derided aspects of the first game was one of the most compelling for myself, that fundamental mechanical satisfaction of combat, and this was something that I can already feel in the new game from the previews, but the intensity is dialed up considerably. The visceral thrill of smashing through enemies with a chainsword, the cracking thud of bolter fire, and the sheer power of a well-timed jump pack landing as you crash into the enemies like a bolt of lightning.
Yeah.
Space Marine 2 seems to be solidly delivering that sense
I'm gonna be using
of
me
brutal,
a hammer.
exhilarating
Big
action
ass hammer.
that made the first game very memorable. But
Big
now
ass
also
hammer
the
swings.
addition of cooperative gameplay, which promises extended replayability and the enjoyment of tailoring your own Marines with their custom aesthetics and stat tree builds. The ability though also to replay missions with different team compositions is greatly exciting, not least because it raises the prospect of being able to bring new people into the space of 40k and help walk them through their first steps onto the path of full immersion into the galaxy of M41, something I have found myself already inundated with invitations for. Space Marine 2 releases September 9, 2024 on PlayStation 5, Xbox and PC. You can play up to 4 days early with the Gold or Ultra editions, which are available for pre-order now. Will Space Marine 2 live up to the hype?
Few months later
We will know
already,
soon
man.
enough. But many who I know who have previewed the game already and
been
who
a
have
few
likely
months since the joint
seen
came out.
are feeling pretty
Time
confident
moves
that this
by
could
so
indeed
fast.
be the ultimate
Holy
40k
shit.
experience. Because to play this game is awe-inspiring. It's a game which fulfills the desire to take on the role as one of the Emperor's angels and lead the fight to the Xenos and the heretics in the grim dark future, where we battle for the fate of billions and indeed all mankind. For as ever, there is only war.
Only war. Only war. Hell fucking yeah, man. Man. Learning about all the background about Titus has really been really fucking dope, man. And especially like slight mentions of like other characters like Theon I think his name is. That's also, you know, one of the Primarch, the Primarch. And also like knowing other characters in this world, they like are super in depth as well, bro. I'm really looking forward to potentially learning more about like the other characters. Or other, yeah, definitely other characters, man. If you have other suggestions, leave them in the comment section, man. I'll watch another character, what's it called? Deep dive video, man. I'm down for it, bro. Especially that nigga Horus. Still waiting on somebody to recommend a video on that shit. Smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, man. We'll catch you guys later.